بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Alhamdulillah, we have concluded 2 sessions already of the course of Umar bin Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Now we're going to make a start on session number 3. And inshallah, session number 3 will continue all the way up to Salatul Asr. And Salatul Asr is at 3:15. Now before Salatul Dhuhr, we were on the topic of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, the Truce of Hudaybiyah. And I mentioned that there were 3 companions in total who disagreed with the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. The 3 companions, brothers and sisters, were number 1, Umar bin Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. The second companion was Usayd ibn Hudayr. Usayd ibn Hudayr. And the third companion was Sa'd bin Ubadah radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So these were the 3 companions who did not agree with the peace treaty of Hudaybiyah. Now why didn't these 3 companions agree with the peace treaty of Hudaybiyah? Now there were some conditions in the treaty which apparently seemed as though that it was going against the Muslims. Some of the conditions, such as anyone who leaves Mecca and migrates to Medina would have to be returned back to Mecca. However, if somebody was to leave Medina and go back to Mecca, he or she would not be returned back, but rather they were allowed and permitted to stay in Mecca. There were other conditions, but these were the main ones. Also, they weren't allowed to enter Mecca this year and perform tawaf, but rather they had to come the following year and perform the umrah and the tawaf instead. So these were the main conditions of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which irked Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And he kept on saying to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if we have a look at the slide in front of us, that he asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, O Prophet of Allah, aren't you a messenger of Allah? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, of course I'm the messenger of Allah. Aren't we Muslims on the haqq? Aren't we Muslims on the truth? And they are the mushriks of Makkah on the batil. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied, saying, of course we are on the haqq and they are on the batil and the false. But then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said something beautiful, and he said that me being a messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I will not do anything wrong, and nor will Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala neglect me. I will not do anything haram or unlawful, and nor would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala neglect me. In other words, the decision, the treaty which I have made, think of it to be from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command, and what I have done, even though apparently it may seem wrong, it may seem unfair, but in the long run, in long term, it is something good for the Muslims. So Umar anhu was told by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Similarly, he was told by Abu Bakr anhu that this peace treaty, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has agreed to it, there must be some kind of good and there must be some kind of khair inside it. Now Umar anhu, he voiced his concern about the treaty. And from this, brothers and sisters, we can derive another point, and this was like the second teachings, the second upbringing, the second nurturing of Umar anhu. And that is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he made a decision, but he allowed Umar anhu to voice his concern. And we will read this later on in the course when we will look at some stories of Umar anhu, where Umar anhu would sometimes make a decision, but he will also ask the companions and the Sahabas that if you have an objection or if you have some concerns, then please bring it forward. And the same we can understand here, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made a peace treaty, but he allowed the Sahabas, like Umar anhu, like Usayd bin Hudayr, like Sa'd bin Ubadah, to raise an objection as long as it is sincerely done with the intention to ask the reason why such a decision was made, rather than to raise an objection to rock the boat, rather than to raise an objection to cause ikhtilaf and to cause differences. And this is like another point which in particular leaders and imams in particular should kind of adhere to. And that is that sometimes it is good that you listen to your flocks. You listen to the people who are under your control. It shouldn't be like an imam or a leader just gives decisions according to his desires and whims, or do this, do that. And then he doesn't listen to the people. He doesn't listen that whether that is something which they agree to, that is something which they want, that is something which they are happy with. So similarly, subhanAllah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even though he made the treaty, even though the truce was made, he still allowed the Sahabas to raise the objection. But the objection here, raised by Umar bin Khattab, he didn't do it with the wrong intention. He didn't do it to cause ikhtilaf. He just, as a student, as a humble person, as a sincere person, he wanted to understand why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took this decision. Sometimes it happens that if an imam was to make a decision and somebody then stands up and says, Imam Sahib, why did you make that decision for? Then the Imam Sahib gets all angry and upset, or he's going against me, he's not listening to me, he's going and doing ikhtilaf and so on. So what this particular story or incident, brothers, is telling us, and this was the second nurturing of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam of Umar bin Khattab anhu, is that Umar bin Khattab anhu, when he would become a leader, he would also encounter some kind of differences of opinions. But what he should do when there's differences of opinions is that those who have the objection, give them the platform, give them the opportunity to raise the objection, so that either if you are on the wrong, you could then rectify yourself, or if you are on the right, or you think you're on the correct and on the haq here, then you could explain to people why you took that particular decision. And believe me, brothers and sisters, when you are more transparent and open with the decisions, you will find more ittihad and closeness and togetherness amongst the Muslims and amongst the community, amongst the Imam and his people. It's only when, say, for example, imams of masajids or committees of masajids take decisions and there's no transparency. When they don't ask the people, what do you want in the mosque? What events do you want to hold? What do you want to do in your masajid? What kind of courses do you want? What kind of activities do you want? So where the committees and where the imams don't take advice from the people and they give a decision, you will see that later on, over time, there will be ikhtilaf and there will be differences. And believe me, we see this nowadays as well, where mosques, institutions, organizations are making decisions, but they're not taking mashwara, or they're not giving their people the opportunity to raise an objection. Then what you get, brothers and sisters, is ikhtilaf and total disintegration of the Muslim Ummah. But where you have somebody like Umar bin Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who sometimes would make decisions, sometimes he would take decisions straight away. But he would always give everyone the opportunity to raise an objection, or if they think that the decision was wrong, or if they think that was correct. He would always give them the opportunity. He would always give them a window and a platform that stand up. If you have an objection, he has said to me, see what I can do. And this is why Umar anhu, during his time, we look at it later, during Umar anhu's time, there was no dissension, no ikhtilaf. No one had any ikhtilaf against Umar anhu. And the reason why is because he was transparent and he was clear. When you look at the Khalifas after Umar anhu, Hazrat Uthman, Hazrat Ali, as all the brothers and sisters, we know that there was some kind of dissension. You had the Khawarij, the rebels, they kind of slowly plotted against Uthman and against Ali anhu. But Umar anhu, there was nothing like that. And we look at it later, even to the extent when Umar anhu removed Khalid bin Walid anhu from his duties, even then there was no ikhtilaf. Even then no one kind of complained, no one said anything. Why? Because they trusted and they believed in the decision of Umar anhu. SubhanAllah, Umar anhu was like one of those individuals that he gave people confidence. At the very beginning, when he converted to Islam, he gave the weak and the poor and the needy Muslims, he gave them confidence. And similarly, when Umar anhu did become a Khalifa, he gave everyone around him confidence. That's how Umar anhu was. He was one of those individuals who had a positive effect on everyone. Same way when he converted to Islam, on that day in Makkah, everybody had a positive effect with Umar anhu's conversion to Islam. Similarly, when he became a Khalifa, he also had this amazing positive feel, and he gave everyone the inspiration to fulfill their dreams. And we look at this later. But this was all because of he was loved and liked by everyone. And why was he loved and liked by everyone? Is because he wasn't like a dictator. He wasn't like my way or the highway. He was always like, okay, this is my way, but if you disagree, then please let me know. Raise the objection. And then Umar anhu, if he thought he was on the haq, then he will try to convince that person. And this is how Umar anhu kind of dealt and judged and ruled over the Islamic State for those beautiful years when there was peace, tranquility. There was hardly any ikhtilaf. There wasn't any dissension. And we'll see there was so much booty as well at that time. So it wasn't like people living in poverty or anything like that. It was such a peaceful time. And that's why Imam Haythami, rahimahullah, he's written a book called Majma'uz Zawaid, a very famous hadith book. And in his Majma'uz Zawaid, Imam Haythami, rahimahullah, narrates a hadith that from the beginning of this world, from the creation of Adam, there have been 3 great decisions, 3 great answers, or 3 great judgments passed. The first decision was the decision one of Sayyidina Shu'aib alayhi salam's daughter made when she said to her father, hire Musa alayhi salam for 8 years or 10 years. So Shu'aib alayhi salam listened to that mashwara and that decision of his daughter, hired Musa alayhi salam, and then got Musa alayhi salam married to one of his daughters. The second decision, greatest decision made in the history of the world, was when the governor of Egypt brought Yusuf alayhi salam, and he took Yusuf alayhi salam to his palace. And the third greatest decision made was the decision made by Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu when he nominated Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu to be the second Khalifa of Islam. SubhanAllah. So this is like great, amazing decisions made. Why? Because of Umar al-Anhu, who he was so much togetherness during his time as Khalifa of the Muslims. Now moving on with the next part of the Hudaybiyah Treaty. So as I was explaining that Umar al-Anhu, he disagreed, but thereafterwards Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abu Bakr al-Anhu convinced Umar al-Anhu that this decision which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has taken, the treaty, is the correct one. And this, brothers and sisters, was then shown later. At the very beginning, it seems as though that the Muslims were on the back foot and they were being degraded. But the correctness of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's judgment and treaty was shown because that then became the introduction of the conquest of Makkah, which happened 2 years later. Now what happened was, when the peace treaty came into effect, it allowed something which wasn't allowed for many, many years. And that was that non-Muslims from Makkah were allowed to enter Medina freely. And similarly, Muslims were able to now enter Makkah freely. For business, obviously, not to stay there forever, but they were now allowed to visit each other freely. And then what happened was, the hikmat or the wisdom behind that was, non-Muslims from Makkah would come to Medina, they would see the beauty of the Muslims, they would see the akhlaq, the characteristic, the manners, and what happened was that they slowly converted to Islam. Similarly, the Muslims from Medina, they went to Makkah, they saw their loved ones and their family, and they convinced them and they made them convert to Islam as well. So over the next couple of years, the Quraysh, who there was a lot of them who were mushriks and non-believers, but over the next couple of years, what happened was that slowly, a large percentage of them were slowly leaving the religion and were now converting to Islam. So when it did come for the conquest of Makkah in 8th Hijri, brothers, during the month of Ramadan, the Meccan population, which 2 years ago may have been majority mushriks and minority Muslims, were now more or less equal. It's like 50-50. Mushriks, 50% Muslims. So now when they wanted to fight against the Muslims during the conquest of Makkah, they couldn't. Because many of their members or many of their tribal leaders had converted to Islam. Many of the men had converted to Islam. So that's why when we read through the story of the conquest of Makkah, everybody knows that there wasn't actually a fight, was it? It was like the Muslims literally bulldozed themselves into Makkah. There wasn't any resistance. There was a few resistance here and there, but generally speaking, there was hardly anything. And the Muslims were able to walk into Makkah and conquer the city of Makkah. But when you look at it, when you look at the introduction, where it all began from, you could say it began 2 years ago when the Treaty of Hudaybiyah happened, which apparently, subhanAllah, seemed as though that there was nuqsan and there was harm for the Muslims, but actually that was the forerunner for the conquest of Makkah, which happened 2 years later. And that's why, brothers and sisters, another point which we can derive from here is sometimes certain decisions which our elders take, which an imam takes, which an alim takes, which may seem as though that it's wrong apparently, but if it is done with hikmat and wisdom, sometimes the benefits can be seen later. It may not be seen now, but it can be seen later. And a good example would be, like one of my teachers, they would encourage the ulamas and the scholars to go into university and to go into studying, like to go to college after you graduate, after you become an alim and a scholar, to move into education and move into universities and getting a degree, becoming a doctor, and so on. So some people didn't understand the wisdom behind that. Like, he's an alim, why on earth is he doing at university? But he should be in the masjid, he should be teaching kids. He should be like, giving bayans and lectures. Why is he doing at university for? So this was like the advice my teacher gave many, many years ago. And now we see the benefits of it. Because by having alims and ulamas in universities, studying, but also at the same time talking and liaising with the youngsters, getting involved with the Islamic society there, the ISOC, and being a guide in that way, because obviously students in particular universities, they won't really relate to an outsider as much as they would relate to an alim who's a student himself in that very same university. So in that way, you do da'wah, and you kind of like open up and you give people da'wah and you give them the correct message of Islam. So similarly, when that decision was made, people were questioning him that how on earth could ulamas go to universities? But now we see the fruits. Exactly same with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. People were questioning Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's judgment regarding the treaty, but obviously the benefits were seen later. Now moving along with the next part of this slide, we've got a title there called Islamic Calendar. And basically what I'm going to mention from the next few subtitles or subsections is regarding some reforms or some changes, some initiatives started by Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Something different from the time of Sayyidina Abu Bakr, because Abu Bakr anhu's time was more kind of trying to resist the rebels, those who were going against the Muslims, trying to resist those who claimed to be prophets, false prophets like Aswad Anasi and Musaylama. But during Umar anhu's time, the system was a bit more, everything had calmed down a bit, and it was much easier for Umar anhu to kind of make his mark on Islamic history. So one of the reforms, one of the changes of Umar anhu, something he started, is the Islamic calendar. Now basically the story goes, if you have a look at the third paragraph from there, that once a business document came to Umar anhu, and basically the document said that this particular treaty or this particular agreement will start from the month of Sha'ban. Now Umar anhu, when he read the letter, he was thinking to himself, or he got a bit frustrated that month of Sha'ban, which month of Sha'ban? Does this business document mean that this treaty is going to come into effect from this year's Sha'ban, last year's Sha'ban, or next Sha'ban? If I was to say November, if I was to say January, which January? January 2014, 2013, 2015? So you're unsure, you don't know. So similarly, the document wrote Sha'ban, and Umar anhu got confused in terms of which Sha'ban are we referring to? This Sha'ban, last year, next year? So therefore, he called all these Sahabas and the companions, and he basically told the companions and Sahabas that we need to start an Islamic calendar. We need to start a calendar. Like have a tariq, a date, like this treaty is going to come into effect from Sha'ban so-and-so, from Ramadan so-and-so, from Zulqa'dah so-and-so. There has to be a correct and a proper dated calendar. So some of the Sahaba suggested that let's follow the Christian calendar. And the Christian calendar, as all the brothers know, started from the birth of Jesus, the birth of Isa alayhi salam. So some of the Sahaba suggested that let's follow the Christian calendar. So Umar anhu refused, and he said that no, we as Muslims need to have our own identity. our own kind of calendar. We shouldn't be following the non-Muslims and their calendar and their way of dating and agreements or schedules. We should have our own calendar with our own dates, with our own numbers. So then someone suggested that let's begin our Islamic calendar from the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away in 11th Hijri. So let's begin our Islamic calendar from 11th Hijri onwards. So then Umar anhu said that we won't do that. Why? Because how can we have a painful event, i.e. the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how can we have that as a beginning of an Islamic calendar? Because what will then happen is that everyone will then remember, oh, the Islamic calendar is starting from this particular year because this was the year when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, so they will be thinking about that. So then Umar anhu suggested that the Islamic calendar should begin from Hijrah, i.e. the year when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahabas and the companions migrated from Mecca to Medina. That should be year 1 in the calendar. And the following year should be year 2, year 3, year 4, and so on. So basically the Islamic calendar, in a way, it got backdated to Hijrah and to migration. So obviously 14, 15 years may have already passed, but it doesn't matter. The Islamic calendar was backdated to the journey from Mecca to Medina, and that was the beginning of the Islamic calendar. Now, then went on to mention that if the Islamic calendar started from migration, the unanimous opinion is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam migrated from Mecca to Medina during the month of Rabiul Awwal. So when you look at it, Rabiul Awwal should then be the first month in the Islamic New Year. The Prophet ﷺ migrated from Mecca to Medina, and unanimously all the scholars agreed that it was during the month of Rabiul Awwal. So that should then mean that the first month of the year should be Rabiul Awwal. But why is it the month of Muharram? So the answer, similar to the one above, because it reminded people, or it would remind people of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's death, because that's the month also Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away. Like he was born, he also passed away during this particular month. So because it would remind people of his death, remind other people of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's death, and because initially Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam intended to migrate to Medina during the month of Muharram. Initially, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam intended to migrate to Medina during the month of Muharram. That's why, because of that reason, we begin the Islamic calendar, or the Islamic New Year, from the month of Muharram. So in other words, it was Umar anhu who started the calendar, the Islamic calendar, the Islamic dating, the tariq. It started from migration, and obviously the first month is the month of Muharram, because that was when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam firstly made the intention to migrate to Medina Munawwara. A second reform, or a second initiative during Sayyidina Umar anhu's time is the title Amirul Mu'mineen. That's why when we look through books of hadith or books of seerah or biographies, we'll find the word Amirul Mu'mineen attached a lot with Umar anhu. Now the reason why is that when Sayyidina Abu Bakr anhu was the first Khalifa, when he became the first Khalifa, the title which was given to Abu Bakr anhu was Khalifatul Rasul. The deputy, Khalifa literally means deputy, the deputy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Khalifatul Rasulillah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, during Sayyidina Umar anhu's khilafat and reign, he was given the title Khalifati Rasulillah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Basically, the deputy of the deputy of the deputy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In other words, Umar anhu is the Khalifa, the deputy of who? Sayyidina Abu Bakr anhu, who was also the deputy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that would have meant that the next Khalifa would have come into reign. Uthman anhu, he would have been called Khalifati Rasul. And then if you had like say 100 Khalifas in Islam, it would have been like 100 Khalifatu, and then all the way to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So obviously he was going to, well, not at that time, but over time he would have probably become a problem. So therefore Umar anhu, during his reign, changed the title, and he said to the people, call me, and this title should then be used for every Khalifa, and call them Amirul Mu'mineen, the leader of the believers. Because Amir means leader, and Mu'mineen, obviously, the Sahaba, the Tabi'in, whoever, they're going to be Muslims, aren't they? They're going to be believers. So from now on, every leader, so it's not just for Umar anhu, but any leader of the Muslims, whether it's Uthman anhu, Hazrat Ali anhu, any other leaders thereafterwards who came, Abdullah bin Zubair, and so on, call them Amirul Mu'mineen, the leader of the believers. Now moving on to the next point here. Some of Umar anhu's qualities. Some of Umar anhu's salient qualities, i.e. some good things of Umar anhu. Now I mentioned there that if you want to understand someone, like what I'm trying to say is that if you want to understand somebody, you need to look at what drives him on. You need to look at his inner self. And when you understand a person's inner characteristics, you are then able to understand why he is doing X, Y, and Z. So let me give you an example. If somebody is naturally or by nature, he is stingy. So when you know that this person by nature is stingy, you then understand, why he buys cheap clothes, why he buys cheap food, why he doesn't put the light on, or why he doesn't put the heater on. You understand why? Because by nature he's stingy. When you understand a person's inner qualities, you then understand what he does outside. Now, similarly, if you want to look at it in a positive point of view, if someone inwardly is very determined, naturally he's determined, then what happens is that you then understand why he spends 10, 12, 14 hours at work. Because he's probably determined to prove something, or to get something, or to earn something, or to, if somebody's really determined, you then understand why he probably sleeps 2-3 hours at night during the exam period at university. You understand, because he's determined. If someone is sincere, then you understand why he makes so much effort, why he spends time with students, why he spends time with the people. If someone is passionate about, say, teaching, then you understand why he takes so many books home with him to mark, why he, say, for example, goes to extra courses, why he puts so much hours of work other than the teaching hours. Because he's sincere and he's got a passion for something. Basically, what I'm trying to explain to you, brothers and sisters, is there are certain things which drives people on. And sometimes it could be fame which drives people on. So sometimes a person, he wants to be famous. So that will drive him on. He'll do so many things so that he achieves his goal of fame. If someone, sometimes lust and desires drives people on as well. So if, say for example, somebody, may Allah forbid, but is seeing an awful girl, he's got a girlfriend or he's in love with another woman, then that kind of drives him on in terms of he will wake up in the morning, he will go to work, or if the woman who's in love with, if she's at school or at university, so he will make sure that every day he will wake up early, he will have a shower, gel his hair, put the nice perfume and fragrance and the scent and so on, and then he'll make sure he's there, because that's driving him on. So what I'm trying to say is that things, they drive people on. Now what made Umar radiallahu anhu, subhanAllah, what made Umar radiallahu anhu what made Umar radiallahu anhu Umar radiallahu anhu? What I mean by that is that why was Umar radiallahu anhu so sincere, so loyal? Why did he put that extra effort and the extra time? Now he explains that if you look at the second paragraph there, that Umar radiallahu anhu, subhanAllah, he had fear of Allah. What drove Umar radiallahu anhu forward, brothers and sisters, is that he had fear of Allah, faith in Allah, and this desire of meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's desires, or this desire of meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What I mean by that, brothers and sisters, is that Umar radiallahu anhu, he had this fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, taqwa of Allah. And because of taqwa and piety, brothers, what I'll tell you is that it actually keeps everyone under check. It keeps that person within the straight path. When fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes from a person, that's when you will see corrupt leaders. That's what happens. Muslim leaders, it doesn't matter. Why they become corrupt for is when the fear of Allah goes. Because look, when the fear of Allah goes, then the Muslim leaders, they become corrupt. Why? Because they think to themselves, oh well, I've got no one to answer to here. Because they've got no fear of Allah, so they think, I've got no one to answer to. So I could do zulm, I could oppress, I could become a tyrant. But if leaders have fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then what happens is that they will, inshallah ta'ala, will never ever deviate and will never ever become oppressive, and they will never ever become corrupt. And that's why Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu, throughout his time in power, he always feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because of that fear, brothers and sisters, that's why Umar radiallahu anhu did not become corrupt. That's why he, i.e. Umar radiallahu anhu, never let power take over him. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, what's such a big deal? But believe me, brothers and sisters, power and authority sometimes twists people. Now, sometimes people think, oh, I wish I could be an Amir or a leader of the mosque, or leader of this or leader of that. Believe me, if your intentions are not right, and if you don't have fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the good become bad when they become leaders. The real good, they become the worst when they become leaders. Why? Because there's no fear of Allah. Because remember, when fear of Allah goes, then you literally become like God, na'udhu. You think, I could do whatever I want here. I could manipulate people. I could do whatever I want. I could give out decisions according to my desires. And basically, I could do whatever. You feel, na'udhu, may Allah forbid, but you're like God in a way that you decide on people's fate. You decide on what you're going to do. You decide when is salah. You decide when is this, when is that. And when that happens, brothers and sisters, that's when you get corrupt leaders. And there's many examples of that throughout history, where Muslim leaders, when the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala went, they became corrupt. But Umar radiallahu anhu, subhanallah, he never ever lost the real sight, the real purpose of this work, and that is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even though he had many responsibilities, he never ever became corrupt. He was the same Umar like he was when he converted to Islam. He was the same Umar during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time. He was the same Umar during Abu Bakr anhu's time. And when he did go into power, he was the very same Umar. Subhanallah. That's how Umar anhu, he never ever let the power or authority take over him. He always had the fear and the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, if we look at the next line, it's written there that Umar anhu, he kept a check on everyone's actions and deeds. Because he had the fear of Allah, he always checked on people. And this is actually a great quality of all leaders. And I mentioned this in our last course about Sulaiman alayhi salam. وَتَفَقَّدَ الطَّيْرَ فَقَالَ مَا لِيَ لَا أَرَى الْهُدْهُدْ أَمْ كَانَ مِنَ الْغَائِبِينَ. That Sulaiman alayhi salam, as all the brothers and sisters know, he had jinnats under his control. So not only had people under his control, he had jinns under his control. Not only did he have jinns under his control, he had animals and birds under his control. When we talk about proper ownership of the world or control of the world, that was for Sulaiman alayhi salam. He had control over everything. The wind, the hawa, everything was under Sulaiman alayhi salatu wassalam's control. Now once there was a bird, hudhud, hoopoe, he was absent. So Sulaiman alayhi salam, he checked and he was looking, where is the hudhud? Where has hoopoe gone? So obviously hoopoe, he came later and he tells Sulaiman alayhi salam that the queen of Sheba, Bilqis, is worshipping idols, worshipping the sun. And then obviously everybody knows the story. Sulaiman alayhi salam writes a letter to her and invites her towards Islam. But what we can gather from this story, that Sulaiman alayhi salam asking about the whereabouts of hoopoe and hudhud, that leaders and scholars and shuyukhs should take and be on top or take a check on those who are under them. So those who are working for you, those who are your employees, those who are amirs, you should take a check on them, see that are they actually really doing the responsibility you have given them. So it shouldn't be that, okay, I've given him the responsibility to run this department of the organization and just leave it to him. No, you should basically find out whether he's actually doing that job properly or not. It's what we call monitoring, which happens a lot in the schools, but unfortunately it doesn't happen as much in the madarises and in the makatib, where there isn't that much monitoring. And because there isn't that much monitoring, we don't really get the good quality of Islamic education all the time, like is the case with the schools and so on. So it's what we call monitoring. And Hazrat Umar anhu, he used to monitor, check on everyone. So yeah, we'll read later inshallah that he would have so many governors who would work for him, but he would check on every single one of them. And that's what a true leader is. That, now look, Umar anhu, let me give you the other side of the coin here. If Umar anhu was all about fame, he could have just been sitting on his throne or on his chair somewhere in Medina, and he could have said, oh, look at me everyone, look at the Islamic State. You know, it's spread to Arabia, it's spread to Syria, it's spread to Egypt. I've got this person there, I've got that person there. Look at the Islamic State is flourishing. What Umar could have done is that he could have gone into this false sense of security that everything's all pretty, everything's all rosy, everything's all hunky-dory, there's no problems. Like sometimes people do with certain organizations that, you know, they have a base here in Birmingham, they'll have a base in London, they'll have a base in Manchester, they'll have a base in Newcastle, and they'll be sitting here in Birmingham thinking, just counting the base they have, counting the companies they have in London and Edinburgh and Glasgow and Manchester, but not actually thinking that whether the base in London is doing good as the base here in Birmingham, whether the base in Manchester is doing good as here, because there's no monitoring that the person who you have left in charge in Manchester isn't doing a good job like you probably are doing it in the base here. So there's no checks. And then what happens, then later on you hear stories of khiyanat. Khiyanat means betrayal, betrayal of funds, betrayal of money, betrayal of this, betrayal of that. So what Umar anhu, he was very proactive in terms of he would make a check that, look, you're doing this not for me. You're a leader of Egypt, not for me. You're the governor of Yemen, but you're not doing it for me. You're doing it for Allah. And even Umar anhu knew that if he did not keep a check on his governors, he will be questioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What's the very famous hadith? I mentioned it before. Hadith of Bukhari and Muslim. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam saying, كُلُّكُمْ رَاءٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. Which means that every one of you is a shepherd. Every one of us is a shepherd. Meaning that every one of you are responsible. So if you are a father, you've got a responsibility over your children. If you are a husband, you have a responsibility over your wife. If you are an elder brother, you have a responsibility over your younger brothers and younger sisters. So every one of you is a shepherd, and every one of you will be asked about his flocks. Which in other words trying to say that if you have any duties, any responsibilities at mosque, at school, in an ISOC, or whatever, you will be questioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as I was saying that Umar dan, because he knew that he will get questioned by Allah, he would check on everyone's actions. If we have a look at the next part of the paragraph, he explains that he was a proactive leader. He did not wait for people to come to him with their problems. Subhanallah. That's amazing. Normally, what happens to everyone, we wait for people to come to us. Otherwise, we just assume everything's rosy and everything's hunky-dory. With Umar anhu, he would actually walk around Medina Munawwara. We'll touch on it later, some of the stories, how he would look after the widows of Medina. So he would walk around the streets of Medina, finding whether there is someone who has a problem. To the extent that, we're going to look at it later, that there was once a Jew he found who was finding it difficult to pay some sort of tax. So Umar anhu even helped him out. So what I'm trying to say, that this was the quality of Umar anhu, that he would always be looking for to see if there's any problem so that he can sort it out. He never let, subhanAllah, he never let, and this is another thing which we brothers and sisters can implement in our lives, even could be, say for example, in our marriage. I'm just giving you an example, with something in our marriage. Like, not to wait for the problems to happen, but if you see the signs of problems, try to rectify at the beginning. Don't let for the issue to happen and let the issue to grow and then you think about sorting it out. No, when the problem's there initially, then try to rectify and sort out the situation. So this was how Umar anhu was. Wait for people to come, but rather he would actually, if anybody had any problems, he would try to sort it out initially. Now moving on to some of his other qualities. Another quality of Umar anhu is that Umar anhu is known to be a zahid, a zuhd, asceticism it's called. Now, what does zuhd actually mean? Now, zuhd, the explanation is given on the slide there, means someone who abstains from worldly pleasures and confronts for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, zuhd or asceticism means to kind of give up the worldly pleasures for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the benefits of this world, the pleasures of this world, you are giving it up for the sake of Allah. Now let me give you some examples of what I mean by giving up the pleasure of Allah. Does that mean that we don't eat? Does that mean that, I don't know, we can't spend time with our wives or anything like that? What does zuhd mean? Now let me give you some examples of what I mean by the pleasures of this world. Now the ones which I'm referring to, something like fame. Because naturally, I think everyone in this room, sisters upstairs, they would probably like to be known. You know, you want a bit of fame in your life. I do this. You know, you want people to know that you do something in life. You don't want people to know that you're a waste of time or a no-hoper. You know, you want people to know that, okay, you're doing something. Whether it's like you're at university, you're doing a particular degree or a course, or you're studying, or you're active in the community, you try to do that. That is like a worldly pleasure. Fame. Now, it goes on to explain that what the zuhd will then mean is that somebody gives up the fame. He says, I don't want it. He doesn't like look for fame. He is giving up fame for the sake of Allah. That is called zuhd. You know, like arrogance. Like, yeah, he may have achieved so much things in life, and he could be arrogant, but he gives that up for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also, the best meaning of zuhd will be, or the most common meaning of zuhd, I should say, is obviously staying away from sins and staying away from gunas. So again, zuhd will then entail that somebody stays away from bad stuff, staying away from sins, gambling, zina, adultery, for the sake of Allah. So all that comes under the word zuhd. And there's also a very famous hadith as well. But Umar anhu, you know, acted upon this particular hadith in its true and full sense. Like as mentioned the hadith of Sunan al-Tirmidhi, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, be in this world like a traveler, or abidu sabil, or like a wayfarer. In other words, be in this world like you're traveling. In other words, the same way a traveler, he doesn't settle, just say if he stopped over at a service station, or if he's in an airport lounge somewhere, he's not going to be thinking about long term. He's just going to be there temporarily for a couple of hours, and then he's going to move on with his flight or with the next part of the safar and journey. So this is how Umar anhu believed this world to be a temporary life, a short journey, a short stop for the final journey, and that is the journey to the hereafter. So that's why Hazrat Umar anhu, he basically did not run for fame. He did not run for dunya. When dunya was being opened to him, Umar anhu actually wanted to stay away from this dunya. And I'm just going to narrate the next story to you. Now, one of the stories is Hazrat Umar anhu's zuhd. This zuhd, asceticism, which I was referring to. So he explains that there was a Friday, a Jummah, when Umar anhu did not come out for the Friday Jummah prayer. When he did come out, he then apologized to the muqtadis, to the followers, that why he was late. And he explained that the reason why, subhanAllah, I did not come out straight away is because this garment or this jubba or qamis which I am wearing, I was letting it get washed. And subhanAllah, he goes on to explain that, and I don't own no other outfit. So this is the Khalifa of the believers, the Amirul Mu'mineen. Amirul Mu'mineen just got one garment, that's it. Look, if we wanted, I'm sure nobody would have mind in Umar who taking extra money from the Baytul Mal and treasury and buying another garment just for himself. So he only had one garment and he was supposed to be the most powerful man in the Islamic State. And he only has one kapra, one garment. So on Friday, he would just wait for it to get washed and dried, and then he would wear that very same garment which he wore the previous 7 days, the previous 14 days, the previous 21 days. He would wear that same garment and he will come and lead the Jummah. That's, brothers, what we call the true meaning of Zuhd. Where dunya opened up to him. If you look at the next paragraph, it says that the world opened up for him. But the more the world came to him, the less he cared about this world. The more dunya came to him, the more he hated it. That's what we call zuhd. That, brothers, is what we call asceticism. Asceticism or zuhd doesn't mean, just like wearing a jubba and, ripped clothing and holes in the clothes and scruffy beard, scruffy clothes, and then pretending to be pious and think, subhanAllah, I've got zuhd. Whereas in your heart you've got the craving for faith. In the heart you've got the craving for desires and riyah and showing off, and you've got the craving for world and money and these things. That's not zuhd. Zuhd also doesn't mean, brothers and sisters, walking slowly. Sometimes people think if I walk slowly, that means I'm pious. So walking slowly doesn't mean you're zahid, you've got asceticism. When Umar subhanAllah, he was the most zahid, but when he walked robustly. When he hit someone, he actually hit someone really hard. But the Sahabas would say that they haven't seen anyone more zahid, more having taqwa and piety than Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab. So what does zuhd mean? It means to stay away from the dunya. The more the dunya opened up to Umar the more he hated this world. And this is, subhanAllah, I mention it now, one of the reasons why Abu Bakr chose Umar to be his successor. Because unlike, say, Umar when he was about to pass away, he chose what we call a committee, a shura of 6 companions to decide on the next Khalifa. For Umar anhu's Khilafat, it was Abu Bakr anhu. He actually said, no, I nominate Umar to be my successor. And the reason why in particular, subhanAllah, Abu Bakr anhu's wisdom here is that he knew, Abu Bakr anhu knew that slowly the world was opening up for the Muslims. In other words, there were many battles and there were many booties and many kind of money which was coming into the Muslim state. So the dunya, wealth and materialistic things were opening up to the Muslims. So Abu Bakr knew that the next leader must be someone who has the total hatred of this dunya, so that he keeps the Muslims under wraps and he keeps them on the straight path. That's why he chose Umar He could have chosen any other companions. But Umar, why in particular? Because he would be the total enemy of what some Muslims, unfortunately, may get themselves into. And that was love for this world. And it's mentioned in Hadith, brothers, which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari. This was one of the things Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam feared for this ummah. Now when Rasulullah passed away, he didn't fear that the companions, Na'udhu ta'ala, would become mushriks and would revert back to idol worship. No, he didn't fear that. Because obviously when you become a true believer, idol worshipping and these things, it totally goes out of your heart. But what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam feared for this ummah is inni akhsha alaykum an tubsat ad-dunya. That dunya will then open up, will spread in front of you. Like it spread to the people before, because of which they became destroyed. So this is why Umar anhu was the next Khalifa after Abu Bakr, because the Muslim needed someone who was going to be strict and who was going to be a total enemy of this dunya, so that none of the Muslims ever contemplate or think about going into dunya too much and then becoming a cause of their own downfall. Another of his qualities, he's wara. Waw ra'ain, we spell it in Arabic. Now again, what does wara mean? Wara means not to just refrain from haram, because then in that case everyone does that. And everyone refrains from adultery, everyone refrains from gambling. Not everyone, but most of the Muslims will do that. But what wara means is to basically refrain from certain lawful and permissible things which may lead towards haram. So it may be lawful or permissible, but if there is a danger that it may lead towards haram, then to abstain from that is called wara. Now, another way to explain is something what we call doubtful things. Something which is doubtful, to stay away from that is also part of wara, and that is also part of taqwa. Something which is doubtful, mashkook we call it, to stay away from that. So it could be something like, there's a chip shop or a takeaway outside, and you know that their meat is slightly dodgy. You know that their meat is not 100% halal. You probably know from the slaughterhouses they're getting it from that. They're not doing the proper zabah, it's more stunned. So wara then dictates that even though there may be a halal sign outside, wara dictates that you don't eat from that particular place. That is called wara. Where there's doubt, even though halal may be written there, in English or in Arabic, whatever, in Urdu, whatever, but just because halal is written there in Arabic doesn't mean that the meat is halal. So what I'm trying to say is that doubtful places, to refrain from eating there, that is called wara. That is called staying away from the doubtful things. Now, I'm just giving you an example, the story here of Umar al-Anhu's wara. It's narrated that there's a companion in the name of Abdul Rahman ibn al-Najih. And he narrates that it was a habit of Umar al-Anhu that he had a camel, a she camel, and his slave girl would milk the camel and would give milk to Umar al-Anhu. So he would drink from it. Now one day Umar al-Anhu, he took a milk which the slave girl gave him, he drank it, but then he realized that the taste was not from the milk of his own camel. Obviously, if it's from the same camel you're drinking every single day, there's a taste, you get connected to the taste. So when it was like a different taste, Umar al-Anhu clicked on that, this is not from my camel. So he then asked the slave girl that where did you get the milk from? The slave girl said from the camel of the state. In other words, the states, they had some camels from zakat, from taxes. So the slave girl says that, I went to one of the state-owned camel, I milked that camel, and then I'm giving it to you to drink. So Umar al-Anhu got so angry and he said, destruction to you. Do you want to give me fire to drink? Do you want to give me fire to drink? In other words, what Umar al-Anhu is trying to say is that, do you know the state-owned camel's milk? It's not haram. What Umar did, just drinking that milk, it's not haram because milk is halal. But because it was the state-owned, and I'm sure Umar al-Anhu being the Amir al-Mu'mineen did have a right over these camels. So what he did wasn't totally 100% haram. But what it was that it was definitely doubtful. So because of that reason, he got really angry on the slave girl that you made me drink the milk from the state-owned camels, and he kind of like chastised and criticized the slave girl for giving him such milk. So this is what is called wara. Sometimes we eat something and we may be told afterwards, oh, this is doubtful. We even may be told that it's haram. And afterwards, oh, it doesn't matter, it's okay, next time or something. So after we've had the burgers, after we've had the pizzas and whatever, or the chicken and chips, and we're told that the chicken is haram, we think, oh, it doesn't matter, next time we won't do it. That's not wara. Wara is that, like Abu Bakr al-Anhu, we read in the previous course, that when he ate something doubtful, he stuck his fingers down his throat and he vomited. That is called wara. That even the doubtful things you don't eat. So this was the wara of Hazrat Umar al-Anhu. Moving along to another part which I've mentioned quite a few times already in the course today, about his humbleness, about his tawazu. And the story of Umar al-Anhu's humbleness, that once he asked a young boy who was riding a donkey to give him a ride. So the boy got off the donkey and he said to Umar al-Anhu that, Ya Umar, O Umar, here, take the donkey and you sit on it and then you ride. So Umar al-Anhu said to the boy that, no, because it's your donkey and you have a more right to it, I want you to sit on the front of the donkey and I will sit behind you. SubhanAllah. Look at Hazrat Umar al-Anhu. He wanted a lift, in other words, a ride. He was outside Medina, he wanted a ride back into Medina. So he's not asking chauffeurs or anyone to come and pick him up. He's not asking for the most expensive camels to come and pick him up. He's not asking for the fastest horse from Medina to come and pick him up. He finds a donkey which belonging to a boy. And what does it do? He says to the boy that, no, instead of you, for example, sitting at the back, or you say, for example, sitting on, walking on the side, you sit on the front of the donkey and I will sit behind. And in that way, Umar al-Anhu, he then walks and he then comes, or they ride towards Medina Munawwara. So this is Umar al-Anhu's humbleness. The Amir al-Mu'mineen, the Khalifa of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, sitting on a donkey, the most powerful man in the Islamic state, sitting on the back of a donkey, with a young boy riding him, and in that way they come into Medina Munawwara. So that is one story of Umar al-Anhu's tawazu and humbleness. Some of the stories I mentioned earlier on in the course, like whenever he made a mistake, he would always tell the person who he may have hit that you can now exact revenge against me. And there's so many other examples of Umar al-Anhu always willing to accept the truth. Because when you look at it, accepting the truth is a part of humbleness. And someone who doesn't accept the truth, that is a sign of arrogance. We call this in Urdu zibdi. What do we call zibdi? Zibdi basically means that someone who is not willing to accept the truth. So Umar al-Anhu, as I gave some stories before about the couple who were talking on the road and he basically hit the husband. So when he was clarified to him that they were husband and wife and it wasn't like a strange man and a strange woman talking together, Umar al-Anhu, he said to the man, because I hit you, I want you to now hit me back. So he accepted the truth. So this was a beautiful and majestic quality of Umar al-Anhu, his humbleness, his tawadu, his willingness to accept the truth. Now moving on to the next part of the course, Umar al-Anhu, just some things, some qualities of Umar al-Anhu and the way he ruled over the Islamic State. Now he's going to explain that Umar al-Anhu, he was the first Khalifa who gave what we call freedom. And now they talk about freedom a lot, that the West, they give freedom they give azadi, we say in Urdu, freedom of this, freedom of that. But actually the first person to pioneer and to give freedom is subhanallah Hazrat Umar al-Lam. I'm going to go over some of the things which he introduced, like the first freedom which we are referring to here, which is very important, is freedom of what we call religion. Now, as I was saying that many people nowadays, they talk about, oh well, the Western law, they give freedom. But actually, when you look at England, say 300-400 years ago, or even during the times of the Tudors, I'm sure all of the brothers and sisters must have studied about them in school. So what we studied about them in school is that they believed, or they had their own Church of England, and anyone who wasn't a member of the Church of England, i.e. they were Protestants, what would happen to them? They would be thrown in, literally a bonfire would be lit, and they would be thrown into the fire. They would be persecuted, they would be tortured, they would be burnt. That's what we read in school, and that's what the history book says about conflict of religion of the state. But Umar al-Anhu, during his Khilafah, during his time, he was the first person to give what we call freedom of religion. Christians were allowed to practice their religion. Jews were allowed to practice their religion. Fire worshippers, idol worshippers, everyone was allowed to practice their religion. Even those who didn't believe in God, Dahliya, atheists, they were even allowed to practice their religion. So what I'm trying to explain, brothers and sisters, is that this freedom of religion, which unfortunately it gives the impression, and many Muslims also believe this as well, that the West was the first one to give the freedom of religion. Actually, freedom of religion, it started from Sayyidina Umar al-Anhu's time. Actually, if you want to put it back, it started from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time. What's the Quranic verse? La ikraha fi din. There is no compulsion in deen. There is no force in deen. So in other words, you're not forced or obliged to become a Muslim. There is no compulsion in deen. In other words, during Umar al-Anhu's time, you are a Christian, then so be it, you can act freely upon your religion. You can go to your monasteries, you can go to your church, you can practice, you can do whatever. So this freedom of religion was started by Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab al-Anhu. In the state, Islamic state, you were allowed to practice religion. There was no force, compulsion, anything to become a Muslim. They were freely allowed to practice the religion. Not only that, they were even freely allowed to kind of practice their own festivals. Their own festivals. There were quite a few festivals the Mushriks had. Neiroz, Maharjan, for like New Year's and autumns, for harvest and so on. So these festivals, the Muslims permitted the Mushriks to follow and to celebrate in an Islamic state. So the first, what we call freedom of religion, is started from Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab al-Anhu's time. Also freedom of movement. So Umar al-Anhu, the first one to pioneer freedom of movement. In other words, if you lived in Medina and you want to now move to Syria, Sham, you are allowed to do that. So within the Islamic state, you could like pack your bags and go to wherever. It was totally allowed, totally permitted. Obviously, now it's not that, it's not considered to be strange or anything. Now it's quite common. People living in Birmingham, due to work or one reason or another, will move to London, will move to Manchester. But when you look at it, Umar al-Anhu was the first to pioneer, first one to agree on movement of one place to another. Freedom to express views. Again, as I already explained to you right at the beginning of the third session, that if anybody had an objection, Hazrat Umar al-Anhu would allow that person to stand up and raise that objection. Hazrat Umar will not feel intimidated that, oh, this person is objecting, is going against me. He would never feel like that. But rather, he would actually welcome positive criticism. He would actually, tell people to, make some comments about me, make some criticisms about me, so that I could then change and rectify my mistakes. Now, the next point, subhanAllah, tells us about, going back to something I mentioned before, Umar anhu, his fear of Allah and his justice, that he was even just and fair with his own family. What unfortunately happens nowadays, brothers, is that the ones who are in power, they will always give their family members leniency or leeway when it comes to mistakes. So if their family members made a mistake, then they'll say, oh, it's okay, it's family, it's my wife, it's my son, it doesn't matter, we just let them off. But Umar anhu, with him, it was the total opposite. He was fair and kinder more to the people outside. But when he came to his own family, he was the most strict. Because he didn't want to give any of his family members, and also he didn't want to give ammunition to anybody else, that look at Umar anhu's family, they're getting let off, or that certain things they're getting they're not getting caught or they're not getting punished. So he didn't want people to give that kind of impression. Now I'm just going to very quickly narrate this particular story. Umar anhu had a son whose name was Abdurrahman bin Umar. I'm sure everybody's heard of his name. Now Abdurrahman bin Umar, he was the governor of Egypt. Amr bin As was the governor of Egypt. And what Abdurrahman bin Umar did was that he drank alcohol. So Abdurrahman bin Umar, he drank alcohol. Now the governor of Egypt, Amr bin As, he caught Abdurrahman bin Umar drinking alcohol, but he was left in a predicament that, do I punish him? And the punishment is 80 lashes. But if I punish him and I do it in front of everyone, it will look bad. The son of the Khalifa is getting punished. Shame on the Islamic State, shame on Umar anhu. So what Amr bin As decided is, okay, I'll punish him 80 lashes, but I'll punish him at home. So instead of doing it in public in front of everyone, I'll take him to his house or my house, and then I'll just lash him 80 times there, undercover. So I'm punishing him, but at the same time, no one knows about it. So it's undercover. Now, subhanAllah, when Umar anhu found out, he was really angry with Amr bin As. He was saying to him, why on earth did you punish him in private for? Because if it was somebody else, if you drink alcohol, you get punished 80 lashes, that's fine. But you get punished in public, in front of everyone, so that it acts as a deterrent. So when Umar found out that Amr bin As punished his son 80 times, that's fine. But he punished him in private and not in public. What he did was that he fired Amr bin As for that particular reason. Subhanallah. That's what we call Umar anhu's taqwa. By told Amr bin As, you're not fit enough to be a governor. If you are, bending the rules for my son, then you're not fit enough to be a governor of me. You're not fit enough to follow the commands of Allah and Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He told Amr bin As that you leave your post. And then he called Abdurrahman to go to Medina, and when he went to Medina, Umar anhu himself, in front of everyone, lashed his son 80 times. That's, brothers, what we call fear of Allah, but fear of Allah not just to others, or you be strict with others, but with your family you let them off. Fear of Allah, brothers, wara and zuhd means that you fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time regarding yourself and regarding your family. Shall we leave it there for this session? We'll continue with the next session after Salat al-Asr. Allah gives tawfiq wa ma'alayna illa